Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spirabauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am so honored to introduce you to our next guest. We have Dr. Iheoma Iruka, founder, professor, partner at the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Center. We are so excited to have you here. You have a lot of titles.
We just collect titles in academia.
Yeah, but all of it is around important work, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I so look forward to the conversation.
So why don't you start us off by telling us, how did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
That's a good question. I love that question, actually. I would say I feel like I came into it in that I am one of 7 girls. I grew up in Boston, but really, I went to school in Boston, and a lot of my friends, half of us graduated from, Boston Latin School to school, and half of us didn't. And I was trying to understand how and what are the things that lead to certain friends graduating, not graduating. A lot of us were Black, single parent, living in low income households. And so I was just trying to understand, how and why. And I feel like it led me sort of on this journey of like, is it all about parents and parenting and families as the reason? To one that eventually just led to sort of through knowledge building, through my own lived experiences, through more critical perspectives about our history of this country, where I grew up, how I grew up, global world, that I really came to like that supporting children, we can't sort of fix children, we can't sort of fix families without actually addressing some of the serious issues we have in our country that I will argue harms many, many communities, and including children and youth. And so for me, it really came from really a lot of my own journey. Again, of course, supported in many spaces, but I think it came from like my own sort of being open to my own lived experiences of a Black person with immigrant roots who grew up in Boston, and then just discovered that it's not about fixing children and families, that there's some really hard things happening, and we have to open our eyes up to like issues of racism and discrimination.
It's such an important note that you're ending with here, right? So we know that in our country, in the United States, there's this guarantee of a quality public education, but that's not always the case. And I know that a lot of your work, especially with the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, is around how we improve our education, specifically in the early childhood years and pre-K. Can you talk a little bit about that work and why you were drawn to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first and foremost, the ideals of the US are really fantastic, right? Which is that, delivering on a promise that everybody deserves equal access to high quality education, but also the science that says that the early years are really the critical building blocks of children's sort of healthy development and learning, right? And so we think about the importance of investing in young children, we find that evidence is there, right? That we have to support our youngest learners to have all the experiences. And really with the National Academies work, which I was so just honored to be a part of, these really esteemed scholars and thinkers, and really this particular, and with the academies, the specific task and work. And so this committee was really charged. We had a specific task of charge of like, how do we do the review to understand and create sort of a new vision of pre-K curriculum, right? So there was a particular funder, Gates, and they wanted us to really conduct a comprehensive study for a new vision for high quality preschool curriculum for children ages 3 to 5. But they also want us to have a special emphasis for Black and Latino children, multilingual learners, children with disabilities, and children living in poverty. And the reason for that special emphasis is because even though we have this ideal of, equal learning opportunities, we kept on seeing in the evidence and the science that certain groups of children, right, children of color, particularly our Black, Latina children, Native children, were being denied access to high quality programs. Those who are multilingual learners, those who have disabilities, and those who are living in poverty did not have the same opportunities to be in these enriching and responsive spaces. And also our curriculum wasn't actually speaking to these groups of children and their communities as well.
like pausing here because I'm debating about the way I phrase my next question. There's a well-known curriculum that has recently been taken from the spotlight and many public schools around the U.S., not for pre-K, but for upper grades. And I remember when I was teaching in Harlem and the first time that I saw that curriculum, and I was reading it and I said, "Who is this for?" Right? Like, who is this curriculum written for? Because it's not written for the students that I teach. It didn't have any perspective. I'm looking at the report recommendations, and it's like it doesn't have their perspectives, experiences, cultures, language, strengths, or any of the diversity and beauty of my own classroom represented in it. And so it's funny because my work today is so focused on quality teachers. I appreciate the marriage that happens with quality curriculum and quality teachers. What incredible things can happen for kids. So, talk about why pre-K. You said early childhood experiences are really important. What was the understanding of what existed before, and what are the recommendations, and where do we want to see it go?
Yeah, I think we think about pre-K obviously, but most people think about 4-year-olds. But I would say we definitely try to include our 3-year-olds as well, because it's that preschool age that really is sort of our sort of critical area. And I would say that curriculum is such an important part of setting the tone, right? It tells us like what to teach, how to teach it, how do we build on children's sort of prior knowledge and their assets, right? But also integration of family educator voice. And we will say that, even our job for this particular committee was not to look at every single individual curriculum in existence, but it's really that the evidence thus far show that yes, we have some curriculum that do provide some evidence of supporting children's, cognitive outcomes and some academic outcomes and social emotional outcomes. But for the most part, it didn't do what it needed to do, which is really, like you just mentioned, right? Be able to really meet the fullness, the full needs of all of our children, right? A lot of our curriculum were really Eurocentric based, middle class based. They didn't speak to the richness of really this tapestry of diversity of our children, of our families, and our communities. And so I think that was one of the big pieces, right? And that if we're trying to really promote children's learning, especially those who have been furthest left behind, our children of color, our children living in poverty, our children with disabilities, and those who are multilingual learners, they've been left behind really in this whole learning landscape opportunities. And if we're going to reach them fully, we have to reach them by building on who they are, what their assets are. So one of it was really that sort of particular part. The other, I think we also want to sort of, I think, really underscore for this particular sort of, I think, report is that curriculum in of itself, and I say this a lot, is not a panacea, right? The committee was really clear in that curriculum done really well, evidence-based and research informed, that's really thinking about the whole child and all that is really important. But it cannot be done without thinking about the implementation of it, right? The context of implementation, like you said, who the teachers are, their skill sets, their stressors, their supports. What is the condition of the children who are coming there? Is it speaking to the children, the community that they're from, their families, right? Are the workforce well compensated? Will they be there over sort of, several years? Because curriculum implementation takes a while to take hold and really be fully implemented, right? And so that's like one of the things. But also this idea of like good and bad and the false dichotomies, right? Like you'll hear often, right, Haley, this idea of like, well, children should be learning academics versus play, or like, oh, it should be child initiated versus teacher directed, or domain general versus domain specific. And our argument for the community is that we really should reject a lot of these false dichotomies, that children need a combination, right? This tapestry of like, they need to include play and academic. It needs to, incorporate, integrate domain, specific things like whether it's around literacy or social emotional with more, sort of domain general about sort of, having a responsive and sensitive and nurturing classroom, right? That children need all of these things together to really support fully their learning experiences. That's really, I will cut it down. So that's really what the committee is saying in the report.
I'm a little bit kicking myself because just last week I interviewed Isabel Howe from Stanford Learning Accelerator about her new book, Love to Learn. And the two of you together probably would have had the best conversation about the marriage between the ideas you're bringing to the table here, right? Your focus in this work was really around the curriculum. However, you've named, as she has as well, that there's many things that make up a rich, nurturing, supportive childhood experiences for all children, not just a subset of children. children, and you two would have really hit it off.
Maybe that's the
Had a
next
great.
time. Here's the next
You know
conversation.
what? I agree. Part two coming soon. Part two coming soon. But, in that conversation, we talked about the importance of one strong relationship for a child in early childhood years. So before the age of 5, and how impactful that is in their long-term success, both emotionally, socioeconomically, academically, all the pieces depend on one positive experience. And that experience can be with a great teacher.
Yes, we wouldn't. I mean, I could not agree more. I would think about my own life where I had one of my in Boston, one of my teachers. Interesting, she had crazy hair like I do now, and she often called me Dr. I Square. She was my math
Oh,
teacher. I know it's the wildest thing, and I just
and
remember.
here you are.
I know it was crazy. And she and just the level of sort of nurturing, the level of high expectation she had for me, the way that she connected the materials to my learning and my other, friends and peers learning. Like to me, the teacher really, because children are there. Think about our youngest children, right? And we know those relationship matters. They're there for like sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day, right? Because parents are
Yeah.
working and doing what they're supposed to do to take care of their family. And so teachers to me are incredibly important. And I think with this report, we lay out, yes, some specific things that curriculum needs to have and do. But we also lay out that teachers have to also be provided with a full array of support, of training, because they can't do their best if they're not fully supported, they're not fully compensated. And in early childhood, we do have quite a bit of churn in terms of turnover for many various reasons, including the lack of compensation and support and the stressors, right, that comes with taking care of and teaching and loving and nurturing, young minds in the earliest years. And so we really do also talk about the kinds of structures and support that teachers need, because they themselves are human, and humans also, make mistakes and also learning. And we have to be able to provide those sort of supports. And curricula is one way and one important way of providing that information. It is not just for the educators, it's also for the leaders, right? Because leaders also need to be able to know, how do I support my teachers to be their best self and do their best work with our youngest minds, right? And so to me, there's the idea of curriculum is not just a classroom, it's also a systems way of sort of ensuring that they provide the resources, they provide the support, they also provide sort of the praise and the value and the expectations about what children should experience and how we go about that in many ways.
So many people think about early childhood, and maybe they don't have kids, or maybe they have kids, but they didn't really see what the classrooms looked like. And they don't think of pre-K learning experiences as robust and rigorous. And when I read this report, obviously it's written by a bunch of brilliant people that you worked alongside. And there's the inclusion of formative assessment, there's the inclusion of a scope and sequence. Let's pretend, I don't think I have many listeners who have no idea about early childhood, but let's pretend I do, because, not everybody is an awesome educator, and that's okay. We're happy you're here and you're learning about it. But can you describe for us, like, how does it look in pre-K to have assessment, to have a scope and sequence? Like, when you set out to put forth these recommendations, what was the ideal vision?
I mean, so I would say, I mean, I also want to be clear that while we have like all these suggestions, we also know it looks differently, right? For communities, right? If you're in sort of, say you're in a rural community, we may have sort of some limited sort of technology or even like limited resources. So we know it's going to look a little different. But I think if we sort of imagine, as you say, sort of the ideal, right? The ideal is literally where teachers are able to sort of take a curriculum and be able to sort of say, let me take all the ideas of like, okay, a child is learning, say a child is learning how to read, for example, right? The curriculum can help them to figure out, how do I sort of bring different words, different ways of writing sentences? How do I bring it together through a scope and a sequence that can meet the needs of my population? It may give you suggestions about, how do you talk about these words? How do you bring it in your stations? Like if you may have different play stations, you may have different sort of hands-on experiences, you may have different guest speakers, right? And so really the idea of a curriculum is to help to actualize what you believe your children need, right? And a lot of times the hope is that part of your rationale for what children need is based on assessments, right? Assessments could be really from your observation of children and sort of how they're functioning, with peers, with materials, in your own interactions with, small group, whole group, et cetera. So hopefully you're taking anecdotes and notes about where you see children's strengths, right? Whether it's in language and movement and their empathy with others, or it could be where they may need some strengthening, right, in various areas. And so through those various ways of assessing children, again, not just through some standardized assessment only, it could be through observations, through families giving you thoughts and feedback about their child because they know their children, right? And so through that mechanism, you now have sort of what I would say is a portfolio or profile of given children. And now you're going to take this curriculum that says, here's a general schedule of what you can do. Here's a general scope of how to maybe introduce new words or new numerical sort of facts or new sort of ways of engaging with peers in empathic ways. It now lays out some ways that children through the developmental period are learning things, are able to consolidate information. So it's giving you ideas, it's giving you ways we can build on children's knowledge, their experiences, all that. So it gives you all of these ways to do that. But now it really behooves the educator to bring in their own expertise because they have that too, right? To bring in what are the resources in my school, in my community, in my family, in the children themselves, to now say, how do we layer on this curriculum with what we believe our population needs? And so I would say, again, as somebody who is a non-educator, but have been around all educators and been in many classrooms, I think we want to make sure that curriculum are not stifling teachers' ability to generate knowledge and generate curriculum that actually fits children, their children profile, right? Because teachers could see things that clearly curriculum developers did not see, right? And so really the idea is that we're able to just give a tool for both the teacher, but also even their administrators, or if they have coaches, right? A lot of schools now and programs have coaches. And so coaches can also use that to help support and layer on their own training and support of teachers as well. So it's not just for teachers, it's actually for the full system to actually do a better job of creating really enriching, joyful early learning spaces for children.
I love it. I think you've done a really beautiful job of talking about the full scope of the recommendations here. What have you accomplished? What has this accomplished? What movement have you seen? What excitement do you have? Like, I'd love to hear about the impact.
Yeah. Oh my God. So I think just first and foremost, the fact that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at that time really wanted to sort of do this study, right? To do a new vision because they clearly haven't been in this space. They've been funding many, many programs and entities for so long. They realized that we have to do better with our curriculum. We have to do better for our children, those who have been furthest left behind. And so I think just them being able to say, we think this is critically important, I think is so valuable. And it also speaks to our educators, right? So the fact that they're like, oh, now you're focusing on us and our change agent spaces, right? So I think that part of it is just beginning that conversation that we have to be able to create a classroom that works for all of us. And it's not holding just the educators accountable, but also holding the system sort of purveyors like our curriculum sort of developers, our assessment developers accountable that I can't do my best work as a teacher if I don't have the full tools and our administrators don't know what we're supposed to do. So I think at the most basic level is beginning to sort of just have those conversations about what can we do better to make sure that our learning environments are really meeting the full and robust needs of our children, particularly our children who have been left behind, no matter what is happening in society, that we know that our children deserve the best, and our children of color, our children living in poverty, our children with special needs, and our multilingual learners, they deserve the best. And so how do we do that? So I feel like that's one thing that I think it has done. What I think it's also done is actually brought researchers, policymakers, and educators together, right? I feel like a lot of times we're kind of doing our own thing, crossing paths, or what do they say, both ships passing, right? And I think what it does at least brought us together in many ways. So for example, a lot of the sort of strategies that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been doing to sort of really take this sort of report from sort of being a report to one that hopefully can be actualized has been through, I would say, some really clear strategies. One, I think, has really been in sort of creating a much more, I think, marketable dissemination information, right? So trying to sort of figure out how do we use pre-K curricula, because there's a lot of curricula, but there hasn't been a mechanism to actually provide information on what are the different curricula and how do we implement them. So I think that's one. The others that they've been engaging, sort of like our CCSO, sort of this sort of state officers group, right, to really support the state adoption, right? So they're engaging state and district leaders to sort of to use a consensus study, this report to inform pre-K curriculum, policy and practice. So we know that they're actually working with states to say, how do we take this report and actualize it in your districts actualize it in your states. And to me, that's really huge. Some other ways they've been doing it is to sort of embed the study in existing policies and programs, such as through NACE, the National Association for Education of Young Children, through some of the NEAR work as well. So you're trying to make sure that it doesn't just hit states and sort of districts, but also hit some of our professional organizations so that we can actually implement some of these, the vision, right, into actual real life professional expectations, competencies, and all those sort of things. And then some of the other things they've done is actually now they're in the midst of building out a research agenda, right? In the report, there's clearly a move to say that we have to make sure for the vision to actually see the vision, right? We actually need more research, and not research just for the sake of it, but how do we integrate domain specific and domain general together? How do we make sure that curricula is really meeting the vision in a way that says we see all children, their assets, their values? How do we hold curriculum developers accountable to ensure that the curriculum is actually meeting the vision of this new pre-K curricula sort of vision, right? So how are we doing that? And so the research agenda is being developed now with some various experts across the country. And so I hope that that will also push funders, again, federal funders, foundational funders, to really begin to do research that will help to promulgate the implementation of sort of curricula that really truly meets the vision. And so it could take the sort of the idea of let's rate curriculum based on the vision. Do they meet that vision? So there will be some ed reports, if I remember correctly, that's already being done to say rate current curriculum to see to what extent do they meet these vision points that the National Academies consensus report has found. So I do think there's a lot of things in the field, but it's going to take, I think, all of it happening together and coordinated, because one thing can go awry and it all blows up. But I think there's a thoughtful approach happening around state adoption, market information, research agenda, organizational adaptation, so many, and just building awareness in the field, I think, are some of the critical things happening.
That gives me so much hope.
Yes.
Like hearing everything you just shared makes me feel really optimistic, which I need. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. No, I imagine you feel similarly.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I'm in some ways, I feel like just having this report there and having be substantiated by really brilliant people, but also having, state agencies and organizations.
Yeah, the bringing together, that's the part that really sinks for me, is like you need stakeholders on all sides of the equation to buy in. And what you named there was specifically that. Sorry to cut you off, but that's the part, sorry, that's really the part that resonated for me, was like, okay, if you can get everybody who has some stake in this around the table agreeing, you have so much better potential to affect change.
Yes, yes, yes. We agree.
Iheoma, I have a final question for you, which is, I know you're not an early childhood educator, but you've really studied this. You have so many different parts of your career that focus on childhood experiences. And I'm curious what advice you would give an early childhood educator starting their career today.
Oh, wow. And I'm also I'm a parent of a young child, two young children.
Mm.
I will first say I will thank them tremendously for giving themselves, for giving their time, and in many instances their wealth, right? Because we underpay quite a bit of them. And so I want to first just thank them for what they have provided to many of our children and our families. And to know that while many may not value them, we hope that changes sooner rather than later. And we hope that they are fully compensated at the level that they deserve, being, as I call, brain builders that they are. And so I think that's first and foremost. And I think for those who are starting their career, I urge them to be part of the change agents that they're meant to be, right? You want young children to be advocates, to have their voice, to have their thoughts, to be critical thinkers. And I would actually also ask our early educators, particularly those who are new in the field, to remember you have a voice, you have a purpose. Our children look up to you, and what you do tells them whether or not what they're doing and who they could be is possible. And so I do hope that they find their voice. And on top of that, I will sort of just remind them that, as MLK says, right, that progress usually is slow and go backwards, but it's important that we continue to put our foot forward. We continue to see the progress ahead of us, and that we have to be part of the progress for any of this to be possible. And so even if you have closed doors, you have barriers, as long as you believe in the work that you're doing, and on behalf of our youngest learners, who need us and our voice and their voices the most, that they continue to move forward, even in the face of sort of what may feel like a backlash, that they are critically important, and that our children need them to sort of really be honest, authentic, and really ethical, moral agents, because they are what they're seeing. They are the things that matter. So I really hope that they stay true to who they are, the value that they bring into the classroom, because our children really see that, lean into that, and they may not know that, but it sort of being the early years, those early years are so impactful. It imprints in children so much, and they themselves as educators will be imprinting our children for their life course.
Iheoma, thank you so much for coming here to share some of your wisdom and some of your work with the National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It has been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was just a joy to just talk about a little bit of what I do, and hopefully I hope others can continue the journey with me.
Of course. And I appreciate everybody who joined us today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.